Russell Simmons to host Times Square rally supporting Muslims today. A worthwhile enterprise when you stand in solidarity with other people, with groups of people. We can get behind that. And let's hear in his own words how he feels on the subject.
My opinion is that you give the rights to others that you want for yourself.
Once again, a subject that everybody could get behind, no question asked.
Intimidating the community, more people will come out of the ranks of peaceful Muslims, which is what every Muslim in the world is, and join the fringe groups more and more.
He says most every Muslim in the world is peaceful. We can get behind that too, because I wouldn't doubt that most every Muslim in the world is peaceful. But when we get to fringe groups, that's where we got a disconnect, because the most dangerous, what he would call fringe group in Islam, is at the core of their religion, and let's get to that right now.
So do you know what Sharia law is?
Yes, no. Sharia law is the law of Islam. The Sharia law is cast from the actions and words of Muhammad, which are called Sunnah, and the Quran, which he dictated. Sharia law itself cannot be altered, but the interpretation of Sharia law called fiqh by imams is given some latitude. As a legal system, Sharia law is exceptionally broad. While other legal codes regulate public behavior, Sharia law regulates public behavior, private behavior, and even private beliefs. Of all legal systems in the world today, Sharia law is the most intrusive and restrictive, especially against women.
Okay, I'm not going to attack you personally.
Well, that's awfully genteel and civil of you. Why would anyone attack Islam?
But my frustration is that people talk about Islam without knowing anything about it.
You mean terrible people like Pat Condell, who obviously knows nothing about Islamic religion?
And they're willing to completely negate any of my rights as a human being, as a woman, as a person with agency, simply because they have an idea about what my faith is about? Excuse me, Islam to me is the most feminist religion.
Oh, how awkward. Now we're going to have to pull out the big guns on you.
If, like me, you want to live in a world where men and women are completely equal, not just in theory, but in actual practice, then you'd better get used to being called a racist by women who call themselves feminists. Progressive feminists, to be precise, or third-wave feminists, as they're sometimes known. Now, personally, I'm happy to be called any number of ugly names if it helps to draw attention in some small way to the glaring fact that progressive feminists are traitors to their gender. It's entirely thanks to their poisonous influence that when it comes to Islam, the words feminist and hypocrite go together as seamlessly as the words dickless and jihad. Now, everyone knows that feminism has been morally bankrupted by the cowardly refusal of the ones with the biggest mouths, the progressive feminists, to confront the greatest threat to women in the world today, Muslim misogyny. I'll say it again for you girls who still have your fingers in your ears, that's Muslim misogyny. We all know you want to ignore it, you couldn't have made that any more obvious. But it would be nice if just once in a while you could say something critical about it, just to reassure us that you're not quite the totally unprincipled, self-obsessed hypocrites we all think you are. No offence. Seems like the only time progressive feminists make any noise about Muslim misogyny is when they're shouting people down and calling them racists for opposing it. One thing progressive feminists love is to challenge the patriarchy. As long as it's not the Muslim patriarchy that treats women as actual possessions, mustn't challenge that one or you'll be a racist. And if anyone else challenges it, you should call them a racist and a misogynist if they answer back and you think you can get away with it. As long as it's not a Muslim man, of course. Muslim men can't be misogynist or racist, as that would be racist. You see, Muslim men are at the top of the progressive feelings hierarchy of unreasonable, oversensitive people who must always be agreed with and never offended, especially the ones with the great big unhygienic bushy beards. They're right at the top of the pile, those boys. They even outrank loud-mouthed black lesbians, if you can believe it. So, of course, this means that the number one rule of progressive feminism is that you never draw any kind of attention to the plight of women in the Muslim world being abused and persecuted every day by Muslim men, being forcibly married, being punished for being raped. Oh, and whatever you do, don't mention the 1,000 women a year in Pakistan who are murdered by members of their own family. If you do, you'll be a far-right racist. You'll be excluded from the progressive bubble. The dinner party invitations will quickly dry up, and then you might as well kill yourself.
Well, that got unnecessarily ugly real fast. Perhaps you have some other perspective that will make Pat Condell's take on things seem wrong.
Right? We got equal rights well before the Europeans. We don't take our husbands' last names because we ain't their property.
So it looks like women in some of the freest countries in the world have been doing it wrong for centuries, taking their husband's last name and thusly becoming chattel slaves, property of their husband. Now it's time for me to ask you if you know what Sharia law is. Are you familiar with the fact that a man can marry an infant girl? Did you know that a woman can have one husband, and the husband can have up to 4 wives? A man can beat his wife for insubordination. A man can unilaterally divorce his wife. A woman needs her husband's consent to divorce. A divorced wife loses custody of all children over 6 years of age, and testimonies of 4 male witnesses are required to prove rape against a woman. A woman who has been raped cannot testify in court against her rapist, and a woman's testimony in court allowed in property cases carries half the weight of a man's. Now, this is great since you don't have to take his name, but you lose half of your rights as an individual, and that goes into inheriting half. I don't think this is in all Muslim countries, certainly in Saudi Arabia, I think Iran, where a woman cannot drive a car, a woman cannot speak alone to a man who is not her husband or relative, and that goes to the countries where a woman cannot leave her home without the escort of an adult male relative. Yes, please do cherish these freedoms brought to you by your Sharia law that you don't even seem to understand.
Right? We were given the right to own land.
That was awfully generous of the Islamic men to give you that right to own land, something that the repressed ladies in Western countries can't appreciate since they're not able to own land. Oh, what's that? They can own land? Interesting.
In Sharia, it says you follow the law of the land on which you are on.
This gives you the warm fuzzies thinking of that concept, but unfortunately there are Muslims out there that want to return to the glory days of the imperialist Islamic State. And when I say Islamic State, we already have the Islamic State, which wants to overrun the world and impose Islam and Sharia law on everyone. The first step to Islamic imperialism is arrival. The first Muslims to arrive keep a low profile and attempt to gain respect. The next phase is to demand recognition. They want Sharia law to apply only to members of their own community, regardless of the progressive democratic values of the nation they reside in. They want to systematically restrict the rights of women within a secular nation that guarantees them equal rights. Then penetration of the host country begins, attempting to infiltrate all strata of society with their values and use the invented term Islamophobia to shut down any criticism of their barbaric Sharia law. When there is a significant critical mass achieved, they then demand incorporating into its legal system elements of the Sharia law. Finally, we have imposition, when the Muslim population becomes a majority and/or Islam gains control of a nation. Sharia law is imposed on the host society, which is then locked down against non-Islamic influences, including Christianity, but especially the non-religious, who are currently systematically attacked or killed in some countries.
I do not regard Muslims as being the enemy. The problem is Islam. It is not merely a religion, it is a cause. A political cause which is just as much of a threat to our way of life as fascism and communism were in the 20th century. There are aspects of Islam which should make it ineligible for the protective blanket that is assumed to be inherent in the definition of being a religion. It cannot be acceptable that any system of beliefs and practices can be made respectable merely by the inclusion of a supernatural claim. Nazi doctrine does not become acceptable when it is sprinkled with runes and Wagnerian nonsense. A doctrine which seeks to achieve global power under an absolute ruler following the code of a dead absolute ruler is not made acceptable because it contains references to a god, angels and spirits. If it is a political cause, it ceases to be a religion. If it is an empire, it ceases to be a religion. Islam has always been a cause of warfare throughout its entire history. The main way that Islam has been spread in the past has been military conquest. From the very start, in the time of Muhammad himself, and especially in the first century after Muhammad, Islam was spread by the techniques of imperialism. What is the Arabic for missionary? We have no idea, but we all know the Arabic for submission, Islam, and for holy war, jihad, and for holy warriors, mujahideen. The history of Islam has always been a history of conflict on its borders, right from the earliest days. Islam has not spread by conversion, it has spread by conquest and by differential breeding rates. It fights, it kills, it breeds faster. It spreads exactly like a cancer. The idea that a Muslim country would allow in millions of Christian immigrants in the way that European countries have allowed in Muslims is unthinkable. We have not merely allowed in Muslims, we have encouraged them, protected them from hostility and thugs. We have made ill treatment of these outsiders to be seen as the worst kind of unforgivable social behaviour. And what is the response? Do these immigrants assimilate into our society and embrace our values? No. They detest them and teach their children to detest them. First word of English many second and third generation immigrant children are taught is racist.
So, Stop playing the victim. Stop playing the victim on. We've had enough. Stop playing the victim.
It is very difficult to believe that anyone would think that Islam and Sharia law is compatible with feminism or any kind of equality. It is easy to consider that this woman making these statements is living in a free country like Australia, and we have those in the United States who feel they have a lot of freedom, which they do. They have a lot of freedom because they're in a secular country, a democratic nation, which allows them a freedom. But once Sharia law is allowed to enter into the law of the land, those freedoms will disappear. They will go away forever. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you like it. Hit the like button. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Goodbye.